preface. It says, this preface was written in 1977 in response to many requests for a brief introduction to A Course in Miracles. The first two parts, how it came, what it is, Helen Schuckman wrote herself. The final part, what it says, was written by the process of interdictation described in the preface. Okay, so what it says, me and Larry already covered, but it's an excellent outline of the Course itself. It covers the majority of topics. And like a symphony, Jesus introduces something and then he comes back to it, expands upon it, expounds on it, and comes back to it again and again till we have a completed thought, a house of thought that is corrected perception. So now we're going to cover how it came. Remember, this was not part of the dictation, so this did not come from Jesus. This is something that was written by Helen. So let's see what it says. A Course in Miracles began with the sudden decision of two people to join in a common goal. Their names were Helen Schuckman and William Thetford, professors of medical psychology at Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City. It's very important in understanding the Course that this Course is all about joining. The thing Jesus looks for, the open door in the mind that Jesus looks for to be able to come blasting through, is any time you will join with another mind in anything. These two people did not join to make A Course in Miracles. As we'll get into, they joined for a different purpose. Out of that came A Course in Miracles. So any type of joining, whenever you see another's interests the same as yours, that thought, that openness of mind, is the open door for the Holy Spirit and Jesus to move in with miracle working power. It does not matter who they were, except that the story shows that with God all things are possible. Now, I underlined the story because for each person, and probably through time, the story is going to change. Because it's the story. When we talk about history, the old adage is, well, it's his story. History. His story. It's his perception of what occurred. The Holy Spirit taught me something early on. I was reading a biography of Graham Nash and David Crosby. We're very close. They were part of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Crosby, Stills, and Nash without Young. And whoever wrote it interviewed both of them about the exact same issues or same situations that occurred. And he wrote down their version of it. So you would read one chapter about something, and it would be from Graham's perspective. And you'd think, oh, I got the story. I got it. And then you'd read the other side of it. These people are in the same situation. It's just them two. And it's a totally different memory, a totally different story. And it's always that way because this is your world. Each individual separate thought has its own world and it's going to see what it wants to see. So this is a story. And I'm going to give you, before we finish, a list of other places where you can get the story. And they'll be similar, but they'll be different as well. So it does not matter who they were, except that the story shows that with God all things are possible. They were anything but spiritual. Their relationship with each other was difficult and often strained, and they were concerned with personal and professional acceptance and status. In general, they had considerable investment in the values of the world. Their lives were hardly in accord with anything that the Course advocates. Helen, the one who received the material, describes herself. Now, as I read this, my understanding is this comes from an unpublished biography that the Foundation for Inner Peace still has. Some people have seen it. I could be in error here, but I've never seen it. Portions of it are in one of Ken's books, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and portions are here. So here's what Helen wrote about herself. Psychologist, educator, conservative in theory, and atheistic in belief. I was working in a prestigious and highly academic setting, and then something happened that triggered a chain of events I could never have predicted. The head of my department, who would have been Bill, unexpectedly announced that he was tired of the angry and aggressive feelings our attitudes reflected, and concluded that, quote, there must be another way, unquote. As if on cue, I agreed to help him find it. Apparently, this course is the other way. And I would say, apparently, you were right. Now, she says that she was atheistic. But if you find out her background, she was around a lot of spiritual people. Her maid, some other person in her house, I can't remember what role they had. One of them was Catholic, and I believe the maid was a Baptist, but more like a Pentecostal Baptist. She was from Alabama. Of course, Helen grew up in New York. So when they're babysitting or keeping the kid, they say, hey, we'll go to church. So Helen had interests in Catholicism and the great high church type of religion, as well as seeing very spiritualized, free expressions within a Pentecostal type African American church. So I don't know that she was all that atheistic, but that's the way she described herself. Although their intention was serious, they had great difficulty in starting out on their joint venture, but they had given the Holy Spirit the little willingness that, as the course itself was to emphasize again and again, is sufficient to enable him to use any situation for his purposes and provide it with his power. Right? All it takes is a little willingness. That's all he wants. He doesn't want your great willingness. Just be free enough for him to spin you in one direction and get you moving. Because once you're moving, it's more easy to guide you. To continue Helen's first-person account, 3 startling months preceded the actual writing, during which time Bill suggested that I write down the highly symbolic dreams and descriptions of the strange images that were coming to me. Although I had grown more accustomed to the unexpected by that time, I was still very surprised when I wrote, quote, "This is a Course in Miracles," unquote. That was my introduction to the voice. It made no sound, but seemed to be giving me a kind of rapid inner dictation, which I took down in a shorthand notebook. The writing was never automatic. It could be interrupted at any time and later picked up again. It made me very uncomfortable, but it never seriously occurred to me to stop. It seemed to be a special assignment I had somehow, somewhere agreed to complete. It represented a truly collaborative venture between Bill and myself, and much of its significance, I am sure, lies in that. So here's the part about the joining and the collaboration. What did Bill do? All he did was encouraged and typed and listened. He wasn't hearing the voice, but in their joining in this venture, they both got the wholeness of it. They enjoyed the effects of it. It represented a truly collaborative venture between Bill and myself, and much of its significance, I am sure, lies in that. I would take down what the voice, quote, said, and read it to him the next day, and he typed it from my dictation. I expect he had his special assignment too. Without his encouragement and support, I would never have been able to fulfill mine. The whole process took about 7 years. The text came first, then the workbook for students, and finally the manual for teachers. Only a few minor changes have been made. Okay, this is a very controversial statement by Helen in her autobiography. What does minor changes mean? Well, through a series of events, a lot of these earlier drafts were found and compared, and it was realized that some 30,000 words or more were removed from the course, what became this blue book, the FIP version. So why did she say this? Some people say this is a conspiracy, this is the devil trying to screw the course up, screw Jesus' words up. Or was she just saying, if I say, well, we made major changes, what are going to people be thinking about? Well, what major changes? Right? You know, some of those changes were intense. When Jesus spoke to her, he spoke to her about man or mankind. So he would use man. Well, they decided to say, let's make this more personal. So I'm going to change, instead of man, I'm going to say you. Because this is written to you, whoever's reading it, the student, the pupil. Do I care about that? No, I do not. I do not care about those changes. I don't care if it said this and they changed it to that because one of them thought that was better English grammar. I don't care about any of that. But there was a lot of significant stuff that was removed. Now, Larry and I, by the Holy Spirit and in agreement with one another, teach from the Blue Book. We supplement with the other versions, and we read the other versions, and frankly study most of the time from the other versions. But our feeling is that if you start out in those other versions, you're going to get lost in those first 4 chapters. So she says minor changes. This is, like I said, a very controversial statement. Chapter titles and subheadings have been inserted in the text, and some of the more personal references that occurred at the beginning have been omitted. Otherwise, the material is substantially unchanged. There's another controversial verbiage. It was substantially changed. The names of the collaborators in the recording of the course do not appear on the cover because the course can and should stand on its own. It is not intended to become the basis for another cult. Its only purpose is to provide a way in which some people will be able to find their own internal teacher. Okay. It's not about building churches and cults and things like that, although both have occurred. This is what she said it was. This is for you to find your inner teacher. Now, I'm not against organizations. I'm not against churches, whatever you want to call it, your community, a course study group, whatever. It doesn't matter. Point is, you got to find that inner voice. That's why we're called Voice from the Real World. The voice, you're listening to me. Somebody pointed out that I'm boring today. Okay, I don't care if I'm boring. All I care about is, are you hearing the voice within you? The voice within you is not boring, because it'll be speaking directly to you in your world, in words and in symbols that make sense to you, to bring truth to you. What it is. As its title implies, the course is arranged throughout as a teaching device. It consists of 3 books: a 669-page text, a 488-page workbook for students, and a 92-page manual for teachers. Now that's a lot of pages. I haven't counted them up, but I think it's just slightly over 1,200 pages. And believe me, we are recording all of these teachings, and it's taking years to go through this blue book. The order in which the students choose to use the books and the ways in which they study them depend on their particular needs and preferences, not yours. It's on their preference, their need. You can help guide them based on your particular experience, and you can suggest, but you cannot demand. The curriculum the course proposes is carefully conceived and is explained step by step at both the theoretical and practical levels. It emphasizes application rather than theory and experience rather than theology. I'm interested in the experience. I like the theology, but the theology must lead to the experience. If you don't have the experience of peace and the sense of power and the sense of love and the sense of extending miracles and the miracle working power and being part of the ministry and the atonement of Jesus, then I don't care if you can memorize this book. I don't care if you can tell me what page everything's on. That doesn't mean anything to me. It's the experience of your sonship. It specifically states that, quote, a universal theology is impossible, but a universal experience is not only possible, but necessary, unquote. Okay, so this is not the only curriculum. The universal curriculum is the only curriculum, but this is a very specific part of that curriculum. And I don't see one that could be faster, because you can get this in an instant. Although Christian in statement, the course deals with universal spiritual themes. It emphasizes that it is but one version of the universal curriculum. There are many others, this one differing from them only in form. They all lead to God in the end. Okay, they all lead to God in the end, but how fast do you want to get to God? I don't know if it says this in here or not, but the course says you can spend ages in all these meditations and all this stuff, or you can even fight against sin. Can you imagine fighting against sin and still finding your way back to God, fighting against sin? You can do it, but it's going to take you a long, long, long time. Why do you want to be miserable and be in hell when you can be in heaven? And it's Christian in statement. She said she was uncomfortable. One of the things she wrestled with was that this was Jesus. Now, over time, between her... Let me go over the characters again for you. You got Bill and Helen. We've been covering that. Okay, so Bill and Helen get this thing written, and they run into a woman by the name of Judy Scotch. Judy is a publisher. She was involved in other spiritual deals, but it's a divine connection, and she becomes basically the publisher of the course. Her husband is Robert Scotch. We'll bring him up in a little bit. They divorce at some point. She ends up marrying a guy named William Whitson. All right? So then she becomes Judy Scotch Whitson. Then Ken Wapnick shows up and becomes part of the team, so to say. Bill kind of pulls out of the situation because he doesn't feel another edit is necessary. So Helen and Ken then edit what becomes the first edition of the Blue Book. All right, so those are the kind of main characters here. They all play their part, all right? And it kind of unfolds in time. But there was a lawsuit that happened, and Ken's organization, he started an organization, was part of initiating that lawsuit. So in that lawsuit is where a lot of information came out. And I'm getting back to this idea about Jesus. In that lawsuit, part of their copyright argument was that you can't copyright something that came from a religious idea or whatever. So whenever you get into fighting, whenever you get into attack and defense, you're in crazy land. You've just agreed to be in the nut house of a war, and you are going to defend yourself. So somewhere along the line, and part of what you can read is the transcripts and depositions that were involved in this lawsuit, they get into this thing about who is this Jesus. Ken says it's not the Jesus from the Bible. It's not the Jesus of Nazareth. It's another Jesus. Well, that doesn't make any sense if you read this book about who this Jesus is. But from defending a copyright, it makes sense. And maybe it was an attorney that had them go in that direction. Who knows? And it really doesn't matter. But what I'm getting back to is the voice of this course, to me, is clearly Jesus. We say it is. We're going to stick with that. You don't have to believe that. If I say that, just skip over it. Act like I didn't say it. I think it only makes sense. All right, so it is Christian in statement. The text is largely theoretical and sets forth the concepts on which the course's thought system is based. Its ideas contain the foundation for the workbook's lessons. Without the practical application the workbook provides, the text would remain largely a series of abstractions which would hardly suffice to bring about the thought reversal at which the course aims. What is the aim of the course? To change your mind, to give you a different thought system, to undo the one you have and to substitute it with a corrected perception, a corrected thought system. The workbook includes 365 lessons, one for each day of the year. It's not necessary, however, to do the lessons at that tempo, and one might want to remain with a particularly appealing lesson for more than one day. The instructions urge only that not more than one lesson a day should be attempted. The practical nature of the workbook is underscored by the introduction to its lessons, which emphasizes experience through application rather than a prior commitment to a spiritual goal. And there are 2 paragraphs from that introduction. I'm not going to cover those because we covered them in the introduction to the workbook. Finally, the Manual for Teachers, which is written in question and answer form, provides answers to some of the more likely questions a student might ask. It also includes a clarification of a number of the terms the course uses, explaining them within the theoretical framework of the text. That's popularly known as the clarification of terms, and we've already studied and recorded on that part of the manual. The course makes no claim to finality, nor are the workbook lessons intended to bring the student's learning to completion. At the end, the reader is left in the hands of his or her own internal teacher, who will direct all subsequent learning as he sees fit. While the course is comprehensive in scope, truth cannot be limited to any finite form, as is clearly recognized in the statement at the end of the workbook. And it says this: "This course is a beginning, not an end. No more specific lessons are assigned, for there is no more need of them. Henceforth hear but the voice for God. He will direct your efforts, telling you exactly what to do, how to direct your mind, and when to come to Him in silence, asking for His sure direction and His certain word." So again, what is the purpose? The purpose is for you to hear the voice of your inner teacher. Call Him the Holy Spirit, call Him Jesus, I don't care what you call Him. Listen to the voice within. That leads to peace. That leads to knowing what your purpose and function is. Knowing that you have meaning and have some level of understanding of what in the world you are doing. You're not just dust in the wind, like Kansas sang about. All we are is dust in the wind. No, we're not. Even in perception, we have a purpose and a function. And in that purpose and function is your happiness. All right, in concluding this, I want to give you some resources. First of all, just as far as timing here, those 7 years that were referenced were from 1965 to 1972. The editing occurred afterwards to 1975 or 6 when the course came out. Helen Schuckman was born in 1909 and passed in 1981. Built that for 1923, and passed, left the body behind in 1988. Now, some resources. Ken Wapnick wrote a biography. It's called Absence from Felicity, and includes portions of the unpublished autobiography of Helen's, and was the source of a lot of questions when it came out because it was rather transparent. There were a lot of things in there about what was taken out and things that were done, and so the questions started. Then there's a book called A Course in Miracles, The Lives of Helen Schuckman and Bill Thetford by Neil Vahle. It's Vahle. All these books are interesting. They'll all have a different perspective. Then there's a book called Never Forget to Laugh, Personal Recollections on Bill Thetford by Carol M. Howe. Carol was a very close friend of Bill toward the end of his time here. There's a book that I am going to get probably today because I didn't know it existed. But it is called William Newton Thetford and the Central Intelligence Agency by William Whitson. This is Judy's second husband, who just passed just recently. I believe he was about 93 years old. A lot of people talk about Bill having worked with the Central Intelligence Agency. I believe what he worked on was psychological profiling. He also worked on the atom bomb project in some capacity at the University of Chicago in the mid-40s, late part of World War II. So he had kind of an interesting background, but I'm sure there's a lot of conjecture about that, and Mr. Whitson probably clarifies much of that. Journey Without Distance by Robert Scotch. Remember, Robert was Judy's first husband. It's a book by D. Patrick Miller, who is the first publisher of Gary Renard's book, Disappearance of the Universe. It's called Understanding A Course in Miracles, The History, Message, and Legacy of a Spiritual Path for Today, and includes a lot of interesting background information. The original edition, the Urtext, and the new CE edition all have more information about how this course came and why they decided to edit the way they edited. Sparkly edition, so I don't think there's much in the actual book, but if you go to the website, they have other information. Now, none of this is necessary to know any of this background. And don't get caught off, I'm going to just spend a year studying all this stuff. It's not necessary. The bottom line is the course is the course. The purpose was to bring the course, not the players. And that's why sometimes I wish I didn't even know who they were. But it doesn't really matter.